Deep within the obsidian void of Lake Superior lies the rusted engine room of the Kamloops, an iron coffin for the damned. If you dare descend, you will find a Headless Sentinel waiting. There, preserved in a horrific scream of stillness, a sailor stands guard over a tomb of floating crewmates, a spectral brotherhood suspended in the freezing deep, where only the flicker of your flashlight can unveil a horror that the lake refuses to forget. From the jagged horns of the water panther stirring the gales to the phantom lights of the Edmund Fitzgerald screaming through the fog, this lake is a graveyard of secrets that defy the laws of nature. We are diving into a realm where indigenous curses meet modern vanishings and where the Witch of November still hunts for souls. Stay with me until the final bell tolls, for the deepest mystery isn't just what sank, it's what is still alive down there. Are you ready to face the ghosts of the greatest of the Great Lakes? Before we unravel the dark history of these waters, I want to share a story that still haunts the shores of Whitefish Point. On the rugged, unforgiving shores of Lake Superior, there was no man more respected than Captain Robert Carlson. As the keeper of the Whitefish Point lighthouse, he was a figure of stone and duty. In 1914, he had earned his legend by launching a small rowboat into a murderous gale to save 11 men from a capsized fishing boat. One of those rescued later wrote, "There is not one man in 1,000 who would have attempted to launch a small boat in such a sea, and few men who could handle a boat at all in such a wind." This was not a man prone to superstition. He was a man of cold, hard facts. One afternoon, the day was bright, warm, and deceptively calm. Carlson stood with his young granddaughter looking out at the glass-like water. But the captain's seasoned eyes spotted a change. Mist rising slowly from the lake, described by the girl as almost like cobwebs blowing off of the still water. He took her down to the fog signal to begin his work. But as she looked back at the lake, she saw something impossible. She called for him to look. When Carlson turned, his reaction was chilling. His face went white. In a moment of primal fear, he slowly marked a crucifix over his body, his mouth agape. He muttered words under his breath, barely audible to the child. There, gliding through the growing bank of mist, was the most beautiful sailing ship she had ever seen. Its white sails billowed in a powerful wind, yet where they stood, there wasn't even a slight breeze. It was a Flying Dutchman, a ghost ship appearing from nothingness. As the phantom vessel vanished into the fog, the reality of the lake fractured. They saw blinking red lights and heard the clanging of distant bells. The radio crackled to life. The Coast Guard reported seeing the same blinking lights before they, too, vanished. Carlson didn't believe the ship was signaling danger. He knew it was the danger. For the next 48 hours, a heavy fog crawled across the water. Carlson worked day and night, haunted by the vision. He knew what seeing that ship meant. When the fog finally lifted, the 18-mile beach from Little Lake to Whitefish Point was no longer pristine. It was choked with debris. A Canadian lumber hooker and its 2 tows had been swallowed by the lake. The tragedy was absolute. Inspectors believed the cargo had suddenly shifted, sending the ships into the abyss so quickly that no one even attempted to raise an alarm. They were there 1 minute and gone the next. Carlson had seen the herald of their doom 48 hours prior. He had run the fog signal with everything he had, but as he realized standing by his lighthouse, he could not stand in the way of fate. On Lake Superior, the beauty is a mask, and the ghosts are the only ones who know what's coming. Lake Superior is a place of staggering size and haunting beauty. To truly grasp its scale, imagine this. The lake holds so much water that if you were to spread it out, it would cover the entire landmass of North and South America in a uniform layer of water nearly a foot deep. It is the largest of the Great Lakes, the deepest and the coldest, holding more water than all the other Great Lakes combined. But there is something else about it, something harder to explain. The water is cold year-round, so cold it can keep a human body preserved for decades. While other lakes allow the cycle of decay to return a body to the earth, Superior acts as a sub-zero vault. That's why the locals say, Lake Superior never gives up her dead. Experienced divers in these parts tell stories that chill the marrow. None are creepier than the wreck of the Kamloops, destroyed in a savage 1927 storm. If you make it into the lost ship's engine room, which still sits at the bottom of the lake, you are said to be met with a sight of pure horror. The headless remains of one crew member still in place in the center of the room, while several other bodies float around their underwater tomb. It is a place so deep and so dark that only the piercing beam of a torch can reveal these preserved souls, still waiting in the silence. The weather here turns with lethal speed. On a calm morning, the lake is like glass, perfectly still, perfectly silent. But by afternoon, a storm can rise out of nowhere with waves as tall as buildings and winds that cut through your body. Old sailors referred to this malevolent force as the Witch of November. Over the years, more than 350 ships have been torn apart or simply vanished without explanation. Long before steel hulls divided the waves of Lake Superior, and long before lighthouses pierced the obsidian nights of the north, the indigenous Ojibwe people had already mapped the true nature of this water. They understood that Superior is not just a lake. It is a living, breathing, and often vengeful entity. Their maps were not made of paper, but of warnings. Stories passed down through generations about the spirits dwelling in the crushing depths and the shadows that watch from the tree line when the winds begin to change. At the dark heart of their tradition lies Mishipeshu, the water panther, or great lynx. To the Ojibwe, Mishipeshu was never a mere fable. It was a source of primordial terror. Imagine a creature of impossible geometry, a great cat covered in the shimmering scales of a fish, bearing the heavy, curved horns of a bison and trailing a powerful serpent's tail. It is said to reside in the deepest underwater caverns, acting as a jealous guardian of the lake's copper. According to Jesuit records dating back to the 1600s, tribes would never dare to set foot upon the water without leaving an offering of tobacco or food, desperately pleading for safe passage. Even today, the most seasoned fishermen around these shores refuse to speak its name aloud. They know that when the storms rise with unnatural speed, it is Mishipeshu stirring the depths, dragging the greedy and the disrespectful down into its cold, eternal embrace. But the horror of the region is not confined to the waves. Deep within the suffocating silence of the frozen forests resides the Wendigo, the spirit of insatiable hunger, ice, and madness. Among the Algonquian-speaking people, the Wendigo was the ultimate personification of a winter that never ends. It is described as a gaunt, skeletal giant, 15 feet tall, with glowing eyes and skin pulled tight over bone. Some accounts speak of a terrifying white spirit with a star blazing upon its forehead, a creature that grows larger with every soul it consumes. Yet, the true horror of the Wendigo lies in its origin. It is a manifestation of human corruption. A person consumed by greed, or one who commits the ultimate taboo of cannibalism to survive the famine, finds their humanity stripped away, replaced by this demonic hunger. This legend finds a haunting anchor in reality on Madeline Island. History tells us of prehistoric communities there that were driven to the brink by overpopulation and famine. Their leaders turned to human sacrifice and cannibalism, staining the land with such evil that the island remained abandoned for generations, whispered about as a place of genuine, lingering darkness. For the Ojibwe, the boundary between life and death is a sacred 4-day vigil. They believe that when a person draws their last breath, the soul lingers near the physical vessel for 96 hours. During this fragile window, the living must hold ceremonies and offer food to guide the departed. Afterward, the spirit embarks on a treacherous journey toward the land of the setting sun. This is not the heaven or hell of Western tradition. It is a realm where the soul's destination is determined by its ability to resist temptation and navigate the path. However, those who suffer traumatic deaths, those taken by the lake or lost in the woods without proper honor, become the lost. They are the disembodied voices you hear whispering through the pines, the strange visitors who appear at the edge of your campfire, and the source of those traumatic dreams that refuse to fade. One such story survives from the wilds of northern Wisconsin. A young family sat inside their lodge on a night so cold the trees seemed to crack. A knock came at the door, revealing 2 frail, starving women. Though they were strangers, the wife offered them the warmth of the hearth. When the husband returned, dragging a deer carcass into the lodge, the 2 women rushed forward. In an act of shocking rudeness, they began to devour the white tallow, the fat specifically reserved for the hunter's wife. The couple was frustrated, yet they chose charity over anger, allowing the women to stay. For weeks, the women remained silent and cold, yet the husband noticed a strange blessing. He found deer every single day without fail. The strangers were a source of luck, yet their presence was heavy. One night, after the wife finally vented her silent frustration, she found the 2 women sobbing. They revealed the terrifying truth. They had come from the land of the dead to test the charity of the living. Because the couple had never withdrawn their kindness, despite the rudeness and the stolen tallow, the spirits promised them a life blessed with many children. Then, a sudden, unnatural gust of wind swept through the lodge, extinguishing the fire. When the husband relit the flame, the room was empty. The women had vanished back into the shadows of the afterlife, leaving behind a chilling reminder. In the north, your soul is measured by your kindness to the ghosts who knock at your door. Beyond the ancient spirits, Lake Superior's history is etched with the stories of men who tried to tame its wild nature, some with prayer, others with solitude, but all ultimately left their mark on these haunting shores. In the mid-19th century, a figure arrived who would become a legend of endurance. Father Frederick Baraga, known famously as the Snowshoe Priest. As a Slovenian missionary, Baraga traversed the frozen wilderness to serve the Ojibwe people, often traveling on snowshoes and personally compiling dictionaries and prayer books in their native language. But his most harrowing tale began when a desperate call for help reached him from a settlement on the North Shore. To reach them, Baraga turned to a voyager named Lewis Gordon and told him they must cross the open lake. Gordon was horrified. The journey was over 70 miles of treacherous open water. He argued that no one had ever survived such a traverse in a small boat. The only safe way was an 8-day trek along the coast. But Baraga was undeterred. He insisted he was called, and reluctantly, Gordon began to paddle. The lake, as if sensing their defiance, struck immediately. A violent storm erupted, and soon they were lost in a chaotic void of wind and wave. Lewis Gordon paddled until his muscles screamed, surrounded by jagged, dark rock formations that threatened to splinter their tiny vessel. Yet, through the roar of the gale, Baraga remained calm. Against every law of nature, they reached the shore safely. Baraga turned to the exhausted voyager and spoke words that still echo through history. "Did I not say I was called across, that I must go, and thou would be safe with me?" They cut down a tree and placed a cross at their landing site, a monument that has been replaced numerous times over the centuries, marking a victory of faith over the fury of Superior. But where Baraga brought light, others found only darkness. Just northwest of Madeline Island lies a small, lonely piece of land called Hermit Island. In the 1850s, it became the refuge of William Wilson, a man expelled from his community who sought a life of absolute solitude, making barrels for the fishing industry. Wilson was a ghost long before he died. One day, a man named Benjamin Armstrong helped Wilson count his hidden earnings. He was shocked to find 4 bags of coins totaling $1,300, a fortune of immense proportions for that era. Wilson was a man possessed by his riches, hiding them in the walls and floorboards of his isolated cabin. Tragedy struck in the dead of winter. Armstrong noticed that no smoke had risen from Wilson's chimney for 2 months. When a search party finally reached the cabin, they found Wilson's body on the floor. He had been brutally murdered. They searched the home, but the treasure had vanished. Only $60 remained behind a clock. For decades, treasure hunters tore the island apart, but Wilson's gold was never found. In 1890, a wealthy man named Frederick Prentice built a grand mansion on the island, but the peace was short-lived. His wife spent a single night there and refused to ever return, though her reasons remained a whispered secret. Sightings of Wilson's ghost began to plague the island. Strange lights flickering in the forest and voices carrying through the trees with no source. Prentice's beautiful home was repeatedly vandalized by an invisible hand before finally burning to the ground. Today, nature has reclaimed Hermit Island, and it is said that Wilson's spirit finally has the silence he sought, guarding his lost gold in a solitude that no living soul dares to break. But the horrors of Superior do not end in the wilderness. They haunt the very structures built to master the coast, places meant for refuge that instead became cages for eternal tragedy. In 1882, Horatio and Abigail Adams Seymour moved into a grand home in Marquette, Michigan, overlooking the vast, cold expanse of the lake. Desperate to shield their children from the local society they viewed with disdain, they built a summer cabin at the base of Sugarloaf Mountain. It was meant to be a sanctuary of isolation, but fate had other plans. Their daughter Mary grew up in those woods and fell in love with the cabin's caretaker, a 55-year-old French Ojibwe man. Her parents' disapproval was absolute. They issued a chilling ultimatum. If she married him, she could never return home. Mary chose love and left, only returning in 1905 to care for her dying parents. Decades later, long after the participants of this forbidden love were gone, the cabin fell into the care of a man named Stuart. One late evening, while repairing the old structure, Stuart decided to stay the night. He had no reason to fear the place, but in the dead of night, he was jolted awake by a sound that defied logic. It was the sound of a woman crying outside, a deep, visceral sobbing that seemed to come from the very air. With a flashlight in hand, he stepped out into the darkness. Every time he moved toward the sound, it shifted, staying just out of the reach of his light, hidden in the shadows of the trees. The activity escalated. When Stuart returned with his wife, they both heard the sobbing and muffled voices. But it was the screams that truly broke their spirit. Loud, piercing screams that reverberated around the cabin as if a woman were screaming with all her might in the same room. A visiting priest was so terrified by the sound that he refused to stay another minute, urging the couple to flee. Desperate for answers, Stuart stayed one final week alone, recording every event in a diary. On his last night, he heard heavy footsteps crunching through the grass and onto the wooden decking right outside the door. When he jumped to open it, there was nothing but the cold wind. He followed the sounds of voices down to the lake, only to find the familiar sobbing of the woman. Fleeing at first light, Stuart discovered a final, chilling mystery. His diary, filled with every recorded horror, had vanished from his locked backpack. In the late 1970s, the cabin met its end. After the roof collapsed under a heavy rain, a fire broke out, turning the crying cabin into a smoldering wreck, finally silencing the screams that had haunted Sugarloaf Mountain for a century. But the spirits of Superior are not confined to the woods. They are drawn to the lighthouses, those beacons of hope that seem to act as lightning rods for the unexplained. The Two Harbors. Lighthouse in Minnesota, commissioned in 1892, is now a bed and breakfast, but its original keepers seem to have never left their shifts. In the early 2000s, Jean Hatch, a member of the local historical society, stayed there with her family. At exactly 3:45 a.m., Jean was awoken by a clamor from the kitchen below. Pots and pans were banging, and she could distinctly hear the sound of a knife rhythmically cutting food on a board. Assuming it was the keepers preparing an early breakfast, she went to open the curtains, only to be met by the inky blackness of the night. It was far too early for breakfast. When she checked the room, her flashlight suddenly fell off the table for no reason. At breakfast, the actual keeper confirmed she hadn't arrived until 7 a.m. and no other guest had heard a sound. The occurrences grew more personal. Jean's mother-in-law had an earring literally jump from her earlobe to the floor as they sat in the kitchen. Later, as they walked up the stairs, the second earring did the same. The mother-in-law joked, "Fine, take them if you want them, and put them away for the night." In the morning, they were gone, never to be seen again. In Jean's room, a wardrobe that was locked with a key would swing wide open every time they returned. Finally, her husband, Mike, was awoken at exactly 3:45 a.m. by the same violent crashing in the kitchen, a sound only they could hear. The guest book at Two Harbors is filled with similar accounts: phantom footsteps, missing items, and the lingering presence of those who still feel the duty to keep the light burning. But perhaps the most tragic ghost of the Great Lakes is the woman of Talbot Island in Ontario. For decades, fishermen working late near the coast have reported seeing a wispy woman with long white hair floating across the shoreline. She doesn't look at them. She simply glides back and forth, humming or murmuring words that no one can decipher. This is believed to be the spirit of Mrs. Thomas Lampierre, the wife of the second lighthouse keeper at Talbot. The lighthouse, built in 1867, was a place of death. Many keepers died at their posts. When Thomas took the job, he and his wife decided to stay through the winter to avoid the dangerous trek back to the mainland. But during the brutal freeze, Thomas fell sick and died. His wife was left entirely alone on an island made of solid rock. There was no soil to bury him, no way to dig a grave. In an act of unimaginable grief and desperation, she wrapped her husband's body in canvas and left him outside, where the Canadian winter froze him solid. She stayed there for months, alone in the silence, with only the corpse of her husband for company. When a group of Ojibwe canoers passed the island in the spring, they found her alive, but she was a shadow of herself, silent, traumatized, and frail. Most strikingly, her once jet-black hair had turned completely white from the sheer terror of her ordeal. Though she was rescued, it seems her soul never truly left that rocky shore. She remains there, in death, a white-haired specter still murmuring to the husband she could not bury, forever tied to the island that took everything from her. These stories remind us that on Lake Superior, the structures we build to protect us often become the cages for our deepest tragedies. The sobbing in the woods, the crashing in the kitchen, and the murmurs on the shore are the echoes of lives interrupted, of people who were taken by the lake or the land, and who are still waiting for a peace that Superior refuses to grant. In the world of the unexplained, there is an unsettling pattern known as high strangeness. It describes locations where the boundaries of our reality appear unusually thin, places where ghost encounters, cryptid sightings, and UFO reports cluster together in a way that defies any rational explanation. For Lake Superior, this isn't just a theory. It is a lived reality for those who dwell on its shores. Here, the horrors aren't just buried in the icy depths. They are walking through the timber and screaming across the night sky. Deep within the dense, shadowed woodlands that fringe the lake, something ancient still roams. Numerous reports tell of a massive, primate-like creature, the legendary Bigfoot. In 2001, a man was driving through the isolated woodland near the lake late at night with a friend. They had become lost and pulled over to study their maps under the car's interior light. Suddenly, movement caught his eye. Something massive was standing right in front of the vehicle. When he flicked on the headlights, he gasped. It looked like a bear, until the creature turned to face them. He claimed its face looked more like a primate than any animal he knew, before it vanished into the darkness of the forest. But, as chilling as the woods may be, it is the sky over Lake Superior that holds the most profound mysteries. Sightings of unidentified flying objects go back as far as 1856, suggesting that these waters have always attracted visitors from elsewhere. One of the most gripping accounts comes from Whitey Bishop, author of Haunted Lake Superior. In the late 1970s, while working for the Erie Mining Company, he witnessed a wave of phenomena that left seasoned miners speechless. One particular night, an ore train was approaching the harbor when a panicked voice crackled over the radio. A crewman claimed a bright, intense light was closing in on the train at incredible speed. The operator asked what it looked like, and the man, audibly terrified, replied that he couldn't see a craft, only a blinding rounded light. The object hovered directly over the front of the train, matching its speed. At the docks, workers thought it was a joke until they saw the headlights of the train coming over the hill, only to realize it wasn't the train at all. It was a massive, glowing sphere in the sky. It hovered over the water for a few moments before shooting upward at an impossible speed and vanishing into the stars. However, no mystery is more haunting than the events of November 23, 1953. At Kinross Air Force Base, radar operators spotted an unidentified aircraft flying low over restricted airspace near the Sioux Locks, right on the U.S.-Canadian border. The Air Force scrambled an F-89C Scorpion interceptor to investigate. On board were First Lieutenant Felix Moncla, an experienced pilot, and Second Lieutenant Robert L. Wilson, manning the radar. Ground control watched their screens with bated breath. On the radar, the blip representing the Scorpion closed the gap with the unknown object. Then, the impossible happened. The two blips merged into one. For a brief moment, operators hoped it was a routine intercept. But then, the single blip continued on its path, and Monkla's jet had simply vanished. There was no distress call, no signal, just a terrifying, hollow silence. Shortly after, the unidentified object also blinked off the radar. An intensive search and rescue mission by both American and Canadian teams scoured the icy waters. They found nothing. No wreckage, no oil slicks, and no bodies. It was as if the jet had been erased from existence. The Air Force later claimed the object was a Canadian C-47 Dakota and that Moncla had crashed due to disorientation. But the Royal Canadian Air Force denied any of their planes were off course. In fact, the pilot of the nearest C-47, Gerald Fosberg, insisted no American jet had ever come near him. Decades later, rumors of found wreckage or hoaxes by the Great Lakes Dive Company only added fuel to the fire. But the truth remains at the bottom of the lake. Felix Moncla and Robert Wilson were taken by the unknown, leaving behind a void that the Air Force's official stories can never fill. Whether these visitors come from the stars or from the lightless depths of the water where no man can go, Lake Superior remains a window to a world we are not yet meant to understand. My dear friends, of all the haunting legends that drift across the surface of Lake Superior, none echo with more sorrow or weight than the tale of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. She was not just a ship. She was a leviathan of the industrial age, a 729-foot titan of steel that vanished into the blackened heart of a November gale, leaving behind an empty horizon, no survivors, and no definitive answers. Launched in June 1958 from the shipyards of River Rouge, Michigan, the Fitzgerald was the largest freighter ever to sail the Great Lakes at that time. She was the absolute pride of the American side, a record-breaking vessel designed to haul massive quantities of iron ore from the mines of Minnesota to the steel mills of the Midwest. For nearly 2 decades, she was the undisputed queen of the lakes, weathering every savage storm Superior could conjure. Yet, despite her grandeur, the Fitzgerald was a ship of whispers and quirks. Sailors who walked her decks often spoke of peculiar vibrations that shivered through her massive hull, an unpredictable rolling motion in rough seas that unsettled even the most seasoned crewmen, and a constant, eerie creaking that sounded like the metal itself was groaning under some unseen burden. Some said it was just the nature of such a massive vessel. Others felt it was an omen that the ship was trespassing on a domain where nature held the ultimate authority. The beginning of the end came on the afternoon of November 9th, 1975. Under the command of Captain Ernest McSorley, a veteran with 44 years of experience on the lakes, the Edmund Fitzgerald departed from Superior, Wisconsin. She was dangerously heavy, fully loaded with over 26,000 tons of taconite iron ore pellets. Trailing just a few miles behind her was the Arthur M. Anderson, another massive freighter under the command of Captain Jesse Cooper. The two ships planned to travel together across the lake, seeking safety in numbers as a massive storm system began to gather strength over the plains. As night fell over the water, the sky turned a bruised obsidian purple. By the following morning, the storm had transformed into a monster, a full gale fueled by the Witch of November. Winds began to howl at over 60 miles per hour, and waves swelled to heights of 25 feet, with some rogue crests reportedly reaching a staggering 35 feet. The Fitzgerald was taking a brutal, relentless beating. At 3:30 p.m. on November 10th, McSorley radioed the Anderson to report damage. The ship had lost 2 vents, a fence rail was down, and water was beginning to enter the vessel. Crucially, both of her radars had failed, leaving her blind in a whiteout of snow and churning spray. Despite the mounting danger, McSorley was a man of iron resolve. He steered his crippled Titan toward the relative safety of Whitefish Bay. His last voice transmission came at 7:10 p.m., a calm but weary response to the Anderson's inquiry about his status. McSorley spoke the final words ever heard from the ship: "We are holding our own." Less than 10 minutes later, the unthinkable happened. The blip representing the Edmund Fitzgerald simply vanished from the Anderson's radar. There was no distress call, no flares shot into the night sky, no screams over the radio. In an instant, 729 feet of steel and 29 human souls were erased from the world. The Coast Guard launched an intensive, desperate search, battling the same gargantuan waves that had claimed the Fitzgerald. For 3 days and 4 nights, they scoured the area, but not a single body was ever recovered. The lake, true to its legend, refused to give up her dead. Months later, the wreckage was located 530 feet below the surface. The ship had been snapped in two by the sheer force of the water. The bow and stern lay roughly 170 feet apart on the lakebed, a silent, mangled testament to the violence of her final moments. But the physical wreckage was only the beginning of the mystery. Why did a ship of her size go down so quickly? Theories began to circulate like the currents of the lake. Some maritime experts believe the ship took on too much water through damaged hatches, eventually losing buoyancy and diving nose first into the abyss. Others point to the legend of the Three Sisters, a rare series of 3 successive rogue waves, each larger than the last. Survivors from other vessels have described them as towering walls of water that hit with such rhythmic, sledgehammer force that they can crush even the strongest hull before a crew can even think to raise an alarm. There are also the whispers of the Ancient Ones. Local Ojibwe communities spoke of a great water spirit growing angry because the lakebed was being gouged relentlessly for ore. They believed the Fitzgerald was taken as a blood offering to appease the deep. Fringe researchers have even suggested that the ship slipped into a dimensional rift or was subjected to electromagnetic anomalies, the same high strangeness associated with the vanishing of planes over the Great Lakes. If true, the Fitzgerald might not be gone, only elsewhere. However, for the families left behind, the broken steel at the bottom of the lake is the only reality they have. The tragedy left deep scars on those who participated in the search. Coast Guard Captain Jimmy Hobor spent those 4 harrowing nights watching for any sign of wreckage or survivors. All they ever found was a single life ring and a light. 6 months later, When he returned to the site to support underwater photography of the wreck, another storm hit. It was so powerful that the massive buoys around his ship were pulled so deep by the currents that they surfaced completely crushed by the atmospheric pressure. Years later, Captain Hobor found himself helping ships through the ice at Whitefish Bay, just 10 miles from where the Fitzgerald rests. He had a black Labrador on board, a confident dog that had traveled the lake many times. But that night, the dog acted with primal fear. It refused to enter certain parts of the ship, cowering in a corner and whimpering at something unseen in the dark. In the morning, the captain discovered that the shifting ice had dragged them directly over the grave of the Fitzgerald once again. The dog had sensed the presence of the 29 souls still trapped in that iron tomb. Today, the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald has transitioned from news to folk myth, immortalized by Gordon Lightfoot's haunting ballad. Every November 10th, the bell at the Mariners Church of Detroit tolls 29 times, once for each man lost. In some years, they ring it a 30th time for all the sailors who have ever been claimed by the Great Lakes. The Fitzgerald remains at the bottom, 530 feet down, in a world where the temperature never rises above freezing, and the pressure would crush human bone. Some say on stormy nights, you can still see her silhouette against the lightning, a ghost ship continuing a voyage she can never finish. But if you stand on the shore of Whitefish Point, when the witch of November screams, listen closely to the wind. You might just hear the toll of a bell, the groan of twisting steel, and a captain's final defiant words echoing across the waves. We are holding our own. Finally, before concluding today's message, I want to thank you deeply for journeying with me through these shadows. If you have your own stories, a family legend of the Great Lakes, or a maritime mystery that keeps you awake at night, please share them in the comments below. Let's keep these legacies alive together. If this journey moved you, I invite you to like, share, and follow for our next deep dive into the unknown. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in our next exploration.